The knock at midnight. Daniel Carter was not expecting visitors that night. The corridor outside his small apartment on Orion Colony Station was usually quiet after midnight. Most workers had already finished their long shifts, and the lights in the hallway were dimmed to save power. Only the soft humming of the station's life support systems filled the silence. Inside his apartment, Daniel sat at a small metal table. A broken toy robot lay in front of him. He carefully tightened a tiny screw using a small tool from his repair kit. Across the room, his 7-year-old daughter Lily slept peacefully on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. The soft blue glow from the station window lights fell across her face. Daniel smiled quietly. Life on the colony station was not easy. Work was long. Money was tight. But moments like this, quiet nights, the fixing toys, watching his daughter sleep safely, made everything feel worth it. He placed the screwdriver down and tested the robot. The small machine blinked its lights and lifted one arm. "Good as new," Daniel whispered. Then suddenly, knock! Daniel froze. He looked toward the apartment door. Maybe he imagined it. No one visited this late. He waited. The hallway outside was silent again. Daniel leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. Maybe it was just someone in another apartment. He reached for the robot toy again. Then it came again. Knock, knock. This time it was clearer, soft, careful, almost afraid. Daniel frowned. Visitors at midnight were never good news on a colony station. Sometimes it meant drunk workers, sometimes it meant trouble. He stood slowly and walked toward the door. Before opening it, he quietly checked the hallway camera screen beside the door. The small monitor flickered to life. Daniel blinked in confusion. The camera showed a tiny figure standing outside. Not an adult, a child. Daniel unlocked the door and slowly opened it. Standing in the hallway was a small alien girl. She looked no older than 6. Her skin was pale blue, almost glowing under the dim corridor lights. Her eyes were large and silver, filled with fear. 2 small, curved horns rested above her forehead, and her thin tail wrapped nervously around one leg. She looked very small, standing there alone. Her hands were shaking. Daniel was surprised. Alien families lived on Orion Station, but they mostly stayed in their own sections. Humans and aliens did not mix much here. The little girl looked up at him with wide eyes. For a moment she said nothing. She looked scared to even speak. Daniel crouched down slightly so he would not look so tall. "Hey," he said gently. "Are you lost?" The alien girl shook her head quickly. Her voice came out very soft. Can you fix our door?" Daniel blinked. "Our door?" She nodded again. Then she whispered something that made Daniel's chest tighten. "Mommy is scared." Daniel looked down the hallway. The corridor was empty. No parents, no neighbors. Just the small alien girl standing alone. "Where is your mother?" Daniel asked calmly. The girl pointed down the corridor toward the darker end of the hallway. "Our home. Over there." Daniel followed her finger with his eyes. The apartment she pointed to was near the end of the hall, where the lighting was even dimmer. Something felt wrong. A child should not be wandering the station corridors alone at midnight. Daniel glanced back inside his apartment. Lily was still sleeping peacefully. He thought for a moment. Helping strangers could be dangerous on a station like this. People sometimes used tricks, but this child looked genuinely afraid, and Daniel Carter had never been good at ignoring people who needed help. He grabbed a small handheld toolkit from the table near the door. Then he stepped into the hallway and closed the door quietly behind him. "All right," he said. "Show me the door." The alien girl's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if she felt safer now. She turned and began walking down the corridor. Her steps were small and quick, and she kept looking over her shoulder as if worried something might appear behind them. Daniel followed, and the hallway lights flickered once as they passed under them. A strange cold feeling settled in Daniel's stomach. When they reached the apartment she pointed to, Daniel immediately saw the problem. The door was half broken. The metal lock plate was bent, and the electronic lock panel hung from loose wires. Someone had forced it open. Daniel crouched down to examine the damage. This was not an accident. Someone had tried to break into this home. Slowly, the apartment door creaked open from inside. Daniel looked up. Standing in the doorway was the girl's mother. She was tall and thin, her blue skin pale with worry. Her silver eyes looked tired, and her breathing was quick like she had been panicking. When she saw Daniel, she looked nervous, but when she saw her daughter standing safely beside him, relief filled her face, and the little girl gently held her mother's hand. "Mommy," she said softly. "The human came to help." Daniel stood up slowly. "Your door lock is damaged," he said. "I can try to fix it." The alien mother hesitated. She looked down the hallway again, the same way her daughter had earlier, like she was afraid someone might come back. Daniel noticed that fear. "Did someone try to break in?" he asked. The alien woman said nothing for a moment. Then she whispered one quiet word, a word that made Daniel feel the cold grow deeper in his chest. "Hunters." The hallway lights flickered again, and suddenly Daniel realized something important. This was not just a broken door. Something dangerous had found this family, and whatever it was might come back. A door that was meant to keep danger out. Daniel Carter stood in the dim hallway of Orion Colony Station, looking at the damaged door in front of him. The metal lock plate was bent outward, and the electronic panel that controlled the security system hung loosely by a few thin wires. This was not the kind of damage that happened from simple wear or accident. Someone had forced this door open using strength or tools. Daniel had repaired many mechanical systems during his years working on the station, and he knew immediately that this door had been attacked deliberately. The little alien girl stayed close to him while holding her mother's hand tightly, as if she was afraid that if she let go, something terrible might happen again. The alien mother looked tired and frightened. But she stepped aside slowly and allowed Daniel to enter the apartment so he could examine the door more closely. The inside of the home was very simple. The lights were dim and the room contained almost nothing except a small table, 2 chairs, and a few containers that looked like emergency supply boxes. There were no decorations, no pictures, and no signs that the family had lived here for very long. The air felt quiet and tense, like the apartment itself had been holding its breath since the door was broken. Daniel knelt beside the damaged lock and carefully lifted the loose control panel. The wires inside were still connected, which meant the system might still function if he could stabilize the housing. He opened his small repair kit and began working slowly, to tightening connectors and reconnecting the broken parts of the locking plate. While he worked, he kept thinking about the word the alien woman had spoken only moments earlier. Hunters. That was not a word people used casually on a colony station. Hunters meant organized people who searched for something valuable. Sometimes they hunted illegal cargo. Sometimes they hunted criminals. But sometimes they hunted people. Daniel glanced back toward the alien woman and her daughter. The mother stood near the back of the room while watching the hallway through the half-open door, her body tense as if she expected someone to appear at any moment. The little girl stayed beside her, holding a small broken toy creature in her hands. The toy had 3 legs and glowing eyes, but one of the legs was snapped off. After several minutes, Daniel tightened the final screw on the lock plate and tested the door mechanism. The metal frame clicked and slid into position, holding the door closed again. It was not a perfect repair, but it would keep the door shut for now. "It should hold," Daniel said calmly as he stood up. "But someone used a lot of force here. Whoever broke this tried very hard to get inside." The alien woman finally looked directly at him. Her silver eyes were filled with worry, but there was also a quiet strength behind them. She seemed like someone who had been afraid for a long time, but had learned to stay calm for the sake of her child. "They tried twice," she said quietly. Daniel frowned. "Twice?" She nodded slowly. "The first time was earlier tonight. They damaged the lock but could not break it fully. And after that we turned off the lights and stayed quiet. We hoped they would think the home was empty." Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "And then?" he asked. "They came back," she answered softly. "That was when the lock finally broke." Daniel looked at the little alien girl. The child was watching him carefully, like she was trying to understand whether he was someone she could trust. When their eyes met, she gave a small, nervous smile. "I told Mommy the human next door fixes things," the girl said gently. "You fixed the food heater last week in the hallway." Daniel remembered that moment. The station's communal heating unit had broken, and several residents had been struggling with it. He had repaired the small system so people could heat their meals again. He had not realized anyone had been watching. "I remember," Daniel said kindly. The girl nodded proudly, as if she had been right to believe he could help. But Daniel's attention returned to the situation quickly. "Why would someone break into your home?" he asked carefully. The alien mother hesitated again. She looked toward the closed door as if making sure it was secure before speaking. "My people are not welcome in many places," she said slowly. "There are groups who believe our species should belong to them. They search for us because of what we can do." Daniel crossed his arms slightly, listening. "What can your species do?" he asked. The woman did not answer directly. Instead, she reached out and gently placed her hand on her daughter's head. For a brief moment, the air around them seemed to shimmer faintly, like heat rising from metal in sunlight. Daniel blinked in surprise. It lasted only a second before the effect disappeared. The little girl looked embarrassed and lowered her eyes. Daniel realized then that whatever ability their species had, it was something rare, something valuable. And that meant hunters would not give up easily. "How long have you been on this station?" Daniel asked. "Only a few weeks," the woman replied. "We move often. We try not to stay anywhere long enough to be found." Daniel slowly walked to the door and looked down the corridor again. The hallway was empty and silent, but the broken metal marks around the lock showed how determined the intruders had been. "If they came once," Daniel said quietly, "there's a good chance they will come again." The alien woman's expression darkened slightly because she clearly already knew that. "Hey, that is why my daughter came to your door," she said. "We needed the lock fixed before they returned." Daniel looked down at the small alien girl again. She was holding her broken toy tightly and watching the door as if she expected monsters to appear outside it. Daniel Carter had spent many years working on stations and ships across human space. He had seen criminals, smugglers, and bounty hunters before. People like that rarely stopped after one attempt. And if those hunters were truly searching for this family, they would not simply disappear. Somewhere on Orion Station, people were looking for them, and sooner or later, they would come back to finish the job. The truth about the family in the next apartment. Daniel Carter stood quietly inside the small apartment, while the repaired door lock hummed softly as it sealed into place. The room was still tense, and the silence felt heavy. Even though the door was working again, it did not remove the feeling that danger had already touched this place. Daniel had spent enough years working around different colonies and stations to recognize the signs of people who were living in constant fear. The alien mother and her daughter moved carefully, spoke softly, and kept looking toward the door, as if expecting trouble to arrive at any moment. It was the behavior of people who had been running for a long time. Daniel walked slowly around the small room while examining the surroundings. The apartment looked almost temporary. He liked the family had moved in quickly without bringing many belongings. A few supply boxes were stacked near the wall, and there were 2 sleeping mats placed neatly in the corner. A small food heater sat on the table, and several sealed ration containers were arranged beside it. There were no decorations, no personal items, and no sign that the family planned to stay here long. The entire place felt more like a hiding spot than a home. The little alien girl had now moved to sit beside the table while playing quietly with her broken toy creature. Every few seconds she looked up toward Daniel as if she wanted to ask something but did not know how. Her mother remained standing near the door, still alert and watchful. The woman's silver eyes followed every small sound coming from the hallway outside. Daniel finally broke the silence. If people are hunting you, then staying here may not be safe for long, he said carefully. Stations like this are full of cameras and scanners. Anyone with enough money can track people moving through the system. The alien woman took a slow breath before responding. We know that, she said softly. But moving again is difficult. We hoped this station would be quiet enough for us to disappear. Daniel nodded slightly. Orion Colony Station was large and crowded, which made it easier for people to hide for short periods of time. Workers from many different worlds passed through every day. But if someone was truly determined to find a target, even a busy station could become dangerous. Daniel leaned against the wall and looked directly at the alien woman. Earlier you said hunters were searching for your people because of something your species can do, he said calmly. What exactly does that mean? The woman hesitated again. It was clear that she had spent a long time avoiding this question whenever possible. But after everything that had already happened tonight, she seemed to realize that Daniel deserved to understand the danger he had stepped into by helping them. My name is Alara, she said slowly, and my daughter's name is Mira. The small alien girl looked up and gave Daniel a shy smile when she heard her name. Daniel nodded politely. I'm Daniel, and the sleeping human in the next apartment is my daughter Lily. Mira's eyes widened with curiosity when she heard that another child lived nearby, but she stayed quiet while her mother continued speaking. Our people are called the Vailari, Alara explained. Our species developed a natural ability long ago. It allows us to sense and interact with energy fields around us. Daniel listened carefully. The words sounded unusual, but in a galaxy full of advanced science and alien biology, strange abilities were not impossible. Alara continued slowly. Most Vailari can only feel energy patterns in technology. It helps us repair machines or control complex systems, but some children, like Mira, are born with stronger abilities. Daniel glanced toward the little girl again. Mira looked embarrassed and focused on her toy. Alara gently placed her hand on the child's shoulder before continuing. Children like her can influence energy around them without machines. They can stabilize damaged systems, control small power fields, and sometimes protect themselves from danger. Daniel suddenly understood why hunters might be searching for them. An ability like that would be extremely valuable in the wrong hands. People want to use that power, Daniel said quietly. Alara nodded sadly. Many groups believe Vailari children should be trained and controlled. They capture families like mine so they can study our abilities. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. He had seen similar stories before on distant colonies where powerful companies or criminal groups tried to control rare alien species. And the hunters tonight? Daniel asked. They are likely agents working for buyers, Alara answered. They track families like us across colonies. If they capture a child with strong abilities, they can sell them for a fortune. The room became silent again. Daniel looked at Mira sitting quietly with her toy. She was too young to fully understand the danger around her, but she clearly understood enough to feel afraid. You've been running for a long time, Daniel said after a moment. Alara nodded. Almost 2 years. Daniel let out a slow breath. 2 years of hiding, moving, and living in fear would break most people. At that moment, Mira suddenly stood up and walked toward Daniel. She held out her broken toy creature. "Can you fix this too?" she asked softly. Daniel looked down at the toy. The broken leg was hanging by a thin wire. He knelt down and took the toy carefully. "I think I can," he said with a small smile. While he worked on the toy, the atmosphere in the room slowly softened. Mira watched closely as Daniel tightened the small connectors and straightened the metal leg. Now within a minute, the toy creature stood properly again. Mira's face brightened with excitement. "It walks again," she said happily. For the first time since entering the apartment, Daniel heard a small laugh from the child. Even Alera's worried expression softened slightly as she watched her daughter. But the peaceful moment did not last long. From somewhere deep in the station corridor outside, Daniel suddenly heard something that made him stop moving. Heavy footsteps. More than one person, slow, deliberate. Daniel slowly looked toward the door. Alera had heard it too. Her face turned pale. "They found us," she whispered. The footsteps in the hallway grew louder, and this time, they were not trying to be quiet. The human makes his choice. The heavy footsteps in the corridor outside grew louder with every passing second, and they were slow, confident steps, the kind taken by people who believed they were already in control of the situation. Daniel Carter stood still in the center of the small apartment while listening carefully. Years of living and working on different stations had trained him to recognize the sound of trouble before it arrived at the door. Whoever was walking down that hallway was not a normal resident returning home late. These were people who knew exactly where they were going. Alera's face had gone pale, and her silver eyes were fixed on the door. Mira instinctively moved closer to her mother, clutching the repaired toy creature Daniel had just fixed. The small apartment suddenly felt even smaller as the tension in the room grew thicker. Every sound from outside seemed louder now, the faint hum of the station's air systems, the quiet vibration of distant engines, and most importantly, the steady rhythm of those approaching footsteps. Daniel slowly stepped closer to the door and lowered his voice. "How many hunters came earlier tonight?" he asked. Alera swallowed nervously before answering. "3." Daniel nodded slightly. The footsteps outside sounded like the same number. Whoever had attacked the door earlier clearly had not given up after failing the first time. They had returned, prepared to finish what they started. Mira looked up at Daniel with worried eyes. Even though she was young, she understood enough to realize that the danger her mother feared had arrived again. The toy creature in her hands trembled slightly because her small fingers were shaking. Daniel looked at the child for a moment. Then he looked back at the door. He had a decision to make. Helping strangers was one thing. Standing between them and armed hunters was something else entirely. Daniel Carter had not come to Orion Colony Station looking for fights. After years of difficult work across human space, he had chosen this quiet station because it offered something simple and peaceful for his daughter. Repair jobs were steady, and life here was supposed to be calm, but life had a way of changing plans. The footsteps stopped directly outside the apartment door. For a few seconds, the hallway fell silent. Then came a slow, deliberate knock. Not soft, like Mira's knock earlier. This knock was firm, confident, dangerous. Daniel did not move. The knock came again, louder this time. Alera stepped backward slowly, pulling Mira behind her. Her body language made it clear she already knew who stood outside. Daniel quietly reached into his tool bag and closed the lid. The simple repair tools inside were not weapons, but a clever engineer could make many things useful in difficult situations. Another knock struck the door. A deep voice came from the other side. "Open the door!" The voice was calm, but there was a cold edge to it. Daniel glanced back at Alera. Her expression confirmed what he already suspected. These were the hunters. "Listen carefully," Daniel said quietly to her. "If things go bad, take Mira into the back room and lock the inner door." Alara stared at him in surprise. "You cannot stop them," she whispered. "They will hurt you too." Daniel gave a small shrug. "Maybe," he said. "But I've fixed worse problems than broken doors." Outside, the hunters knocked again, this time harder. "Last chance," the voice said through the metal door. Daniel took a slow breath and stepped forward. He opened the door. 3 tall figures stood in the corridor. They wore dark armored suits designed for space travel and combat environments. Each of them carried equipment belts filled with devices that looked expensive and dangerous. Their helmets were open, revealing hard faces that showed no concern or hesitation. The man in the center stepped forward slightly. His eyes scanned the apartment quickly before settling on Daniel. "You're not the one we're looking for," the hunter said. His voice was calm, but his gaze was sharp and calculating, and Daniel leaned casually against the doorframe as if he were nothing more than a tired neighbor disturbed late at night. "Then you've got the wrong apartment," Daniel replied. The hunter smiled slightly, but there was no humor in it. "We know exactly which apartment this is," he said. Behind Daniel, Alara stood perfectly still, trying not to draw attention to herself or her daughter. The hunter continued speaking. "Step aside, human. We're here to collect someone." Daniel crossed his arms slowly. "That's interesting," he said, "because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're here to break into someone's home." The other 2 hunters shifted slightly behind their leader. Their body language suggested they were already growing impatient. The leader's smile faded. "This does not concern you," he said coldly. Then Daniel remained exactly where he was. "Yes," he replied calmly. "It does." The hallway lights flickered slightly above them, casting long shadows along the corridor walls. For a moment, no one moved. The hunters studied Daniel carefully now, as if trying to understand why a simple human repair worker would stand in their way. Finally, the leader tilted his head slightly. "You're making a mistake," he said. Daniel looked at him quietly. "Maybe," he answered, "but I don't like people who scare children." Behind him, Mira tightened her grip on her toy. The hunter leader slowly placed his hand on the device attached to his belt. And in that moment, everyone in the hallway understood something important. This situation was about to stop being a conversation. That when the hunters realized the human would not move, the narrow hallway outside the small apartment had become completely silent. The flickering station lights above cast long shadows across the metal floor, and the faint hum of the station's life support systems echoed through the corridor. Daniel Carter stood calmly in the doorway, blocking the entrance with quiet confidence. Behind him, inside the apartment, Alara held Mira close while trying to stay perfectly still. The tension in the air was so thick that even the smallest movement felt loud. The leader of the hunters studied Daniel carefully. His face showed a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. Most people on a colony station would step aside immediately when confronted by armed bounty hunters. Fear usually did the work for them, but the human standing in front of him was not moving at all. "You really don't understand the situation," the hunter said slowly, his voice cold but controlled. "We are not criminals breaking into a home. We are collectors retrieving valuable property." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not like the way the man spoke about Alara and Mira as if they were objects instead of people. "Funny," Daniel replied calmly, "because from where I'm standing it still looks like kidnapping." The 2 hunters behind their leader shifted their weight impatiently. One of them rested his hand on a compact weapon attached to his belt. The movement was small, but it was clearly meant as a warning. The leader raised his hand slightly, signaling his partners to wait. His attention remained focused on Daniel. You are a human civilian living in a maintenance block," he continued. "You repair machines and heating systems. That is your world. This matter is far beyond you." Daniel leaned casually against the doorframe, crossing his arms. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes remained alert. You'd be surprised what a maintenance worker learns after fixing half the station, Daniel said quietly. The hunter leader let out a short breath through his nose, clearly losing patience. Step aside, he said. We are taking the Velari child. The mother is irrelevant. Behind Daniel, Mira's small fingers tightened around her repaired toy creature. Alara felt her daughter's grip and gently pulled her closer. Daniel heard the hunter's words clearly, and something in his expression changed. The calm smile on his face disappeared. You're not taking anyone, he said firmly. For the first time, the hunters truly looked at him with interest. Most people tried to argue or plead in situations like this, but the human in front of them spoke in a tone that suggested he had already made his decision. The leader slowly removed a small device from his belt. It looked like a compact energy restraint tool designed to disable targets quickly. Last warning, the hunter said quietly. Daniel did not move. Instead, he slowly reached down and lifted his small repair toolkit from the floor beside the door. The hunters exchanged amused glances. You plan to fight us with a toolbox? One of them asked with a short laugh. Daniel opened the kit and calmly removed a small metallic cylinder from inside. At first glance, it looked like a simple diagnostic scanner. But Daniel held it with practiced familiarity. Tools solve problems, Daniel said calmly. That's what they're for. The hunter leader's smile faded slightly as he studied the device more closely. Stand down, he said again. Daniel sighed softly. Look, he said. I've had a long day. My daughter is sleeping next door, and all I really wanted tonight was to finish fixing a toy robot. The hallway remained completely silent as he continued speaking. But instead, Daniel said quietly, 3 people decided to scare a little girl and try to break into her home. He slowly activated the device in his hand. A faint blue glow appeared around its edges. The hunters immediately recognized the energy signature. The leader's expression hardened. That's a Terran combat engineering tool, he said slowly. Daniel shrugged. Oh, old habit, he replied. The truth was that Daniel Carter had not always been a simple station repair worker. Years ago, before coming to Orion Station, he had served in the Terran Defense Fleet as a combat engineer. His job had been repairing damaged systems in the middle of dangerous environments. That work had required more than just technical knowledge. It required survival. The hunter leader studied Daniel more carefully now. You're ex-military, he said. Daniel did not deny it. Used to be, he replied calmly. The 2 hunters behind the leader exchanged uneasy looks. This situation was no longer as simple as they expected. Still, the leader seemed confident. You're outnumbered, he said, and this station is not protected by Terran law. Daniel nodded slightly. True, he admitted. And then he pointed the glowing device toward the hallway floor. But neither are you. The next moment happened very fast. Daniel triggered the device, sending a sharp pulse of energy into the corridor's maintenance panel beneath the floor plating. The pulse traveled instantly through the station's local power grid. The hallway lights exploded into brightness. Alarms began echoing through the corridor. Security shutters at both ends of the hallway slammed down with heavy metallic crashes, sealing the passage. The hunters looked around in shock. You triggered the emergency lockdown? One of them shouted. Daniel stepped forward calmly. Maintenance override, he said. The corridor was now sealed. No one was leaving until station security arrived. The hunter leader's face darkened with anger. You just made a serious mistake, he said. Daniel met his eyes without fear. No, Daniel replied quietly. You did, when you scared that kid. Behind him, Mira slowly peeked around the doorway. For the first time since the hunters arrived, she saw something new. The human standing in front of them was not afraid at all. The human they should have avoided. The sealed corridor echoed with the loud mechanical hum of the station's emergency lockdown system. Red security lights began flashing along the walls, casting sharp pulses of color across the metal floor and the faces of everyone standing there. The heavy shutters at both ends of the hallway had slammed shut, trapping the hunters inside the narrow passage with Daniel Carter standing directly in front of them. For a moment, none of them moved. The situation had changed too quickly, and even the experienced hunters needed a second to understand what had just happened. Daniel stood calmly near the doorway of Alara's apartment, the Terran engineering device still glowing faintly in his hand. Behind him, Alara had pulled Mira slightly farther inside the room, but both of them were watching the hallway carefully. The flashing red lights reflected in Mira's wide silver eyes, and although she was still frightened, she now looked at Daniel with a new kind of curiosity. The calm human neighbor who fixed broken machines had suddenly become something very different. The leader of the hunters slowly turned his head, studying the locked security shutters at the ends of the corridor. The metal barriers were thick, designed to contain fires or dangerous depressurization events. So breaking through them would not be easy, especially without specialized cutting equipment. "You've locked yourself in here with us," the hunter said coldly. Daniel shrugged slightly, as if the situation did not worry him at all. "No," he replied in a calm voice. "I locked you in here with station security on the way." One of the other hunters gave a short, impatient laugh. "Security on this station takes 10 minutes to respond on a good day," he said. "We only need 2. Daniel did not argue with him. The man was probably correct. Orion Station security was not famous for fast response times, but Daniel had not triggered the lockdown just to wait for help. He had triggered it because it forced the hunters to deal with him first. The hunter leader studied Daniel's posture more carefully now. So something about the way the human stood told him this was no ordinary station worker. Daniel's stance was balanced, relaxed, but ready, like someone who had been trained to stay calm in dangerous situations. The small Terran engineering tool in his hand was not just a repair device anymore, it was also a weapon if used correctly. "You're protecting strangers," the hunter said slowly. "Why?" Daniel glanced back briefly toward Mira. The small alien girl was watching him from the doorway, her toy creature clutched tightly against her chest. She looked both scared and hopeful at the same time. Daniel looked back at the hunters. "Because someone should," he said. The hunter leader shook his head in quiet disbelief. "Humans are famous for being practical," he replied. "You gain nothing from this." Daniel gave a faint smile. "You'd be surprised." The conversation ended there. The hunter standing on the right suddenly moved first. In one smooth motion, he pulled the compact energy weapon from his belt and fired toward Daniel. The shot was fast and bright, sending a sharp beam of blue energy down the corridor. But Daniel had already been expecting it. Years of combat engineering work had trained his reflexes well. He stepped sideways instantly while raising the Terran tool in his hand. The device released a short pulse of counter-energy that disrupted the incoming beam. The blast struck the wall behind him instead, leaving a scorched mark on the metal panel. Before the hunters could react again, Daniel moved forward. His motion was quick and precise, not wild or reckless. He slammed the engineering tool against the floor panel near the hunter's feet, and triggering another controlled power surge. The electrical pulse traveled through the metal floor grid and shot upward into the hunter's armor systems. The man shouted in surprise as his suit's power system overloaded temporarily. Sparks flashed across the armor joints, and he collapsed backward against the corridor wall. The second hunter immediately lunged forward to attack, but Daniel was already moving again. He grabbed a loose maintenance pipe mounted along the wall and swung it hard against the hunter's weapon arm. The metal strike knocked the weapon out of the man's grip, sending it sliding across the floor. The corridor filled with the sounds of shouting, alarms, and heavy impacts. Inside the apartment doorway, Mira stared in amazement. She had never seen a human move like that before. The hunter leader remained standing, watching carefully as his two partners struggled to recover. Unlike them, he did not rush forward immediately. Instead, he slowly reached behind his back and pulled out a longer weapon designed for close combat. "You're more capable than I expected," he said quietly. Daniel straightened his posture, keeping his eyes locked on the man. "You came to the wrong hallway tonight," Daniel replied. The hunter leader stepped forward slowly, raising his weapon. "Perhaps," he said. Then he charged. The final clash was fast and brutal. The hunter swung his weapon toward Daniel with powerful force, but Daniel blocked the strike using the reinforced metal casing of his engineering tool. The impact rang loudly through the corridor. Daniel twisted sideways, using the hunter's momentum against him, and slammed the man into the wall panel. The armored hunter crashed into the metal surface with a loud bang. Before he could recover, Daniel triggered the engineering tool one last time, sending a focused energy pulse directly into the hunter's suit control unit. The armor shut down instantly. The corridor fell silent again. All three hunters were now on the floor, stunned and unable to continue the fight. Daniel stood in the center of the hallway, breathing steadily but not exhausted. The flashing red lights continued to pulse across the walls as the emergency alarms echoed through the station. A few moments later, distant footsteps began approaching from the other side of the security shutters. Station security had finally arrived. Behind Daniel, Mira slowly stepped out of the apartment doorway, and her eyes were wide with amazement as she looked at the human who had just defeated 3 dangerous hunters. To her, he no longer looked like just a neighbor. He looked like a hero. The story that spread across the station. The corridor slowly returned to silence after the fight ended. The flashing red emergency lights still pulsed across the walls, and the alarm system continued to echo through the station halls. But the tension in the air had changed. The 3 hunters who had arrived with such confidence now lay on the floor of the corridor, their armor systems shut down and their weapons scattered across the metal plating. Daniel Carter stood quietly near the center of the hallway, his engineering tool still in his hand. His breathing was steady, and although the fight had been intense, he showed no sign of panic or anger. And for him, the situation had simply been a problem that needed to be solved. Inside the apartment doorway, Mira slowly stepped out beside her mother. The little Vailari girl stared at the scene with wide silver eyes. Only a few minutes earlier, she had been terrified that the hunters would break into their home and take her away. Now, those same hunters were lying helpless on the floor, while the human neighbor stood calmly between them and the apartment door. Mira looked up at Daniel with a mixture of wonder and relief that she had never felt before. Alara also stepped forward, still holding Mira's shoulder protectively. Her expression carried both gratitude and disbelief. During the years she had spent running across different colonies to keep her daughter safe, she had rarely trusted anyone outside her own species. Too many people in the galaxy had seen Vailari children only as valuable prizes. But the human standing in front of her had risked everything without asking for anything in return. Moments later, the heavy security shutters at the end of the corridor began to lift. The sound of armored boots approached quickly as Orion Station security officers rushed into the hallway. Their leader immediately stopped when he saw the 3 disabled hunters lying on the ground. "What happened here?" the officer asked in shock. Daniel calmly placed the Terran engineering tool back into his repair kit and raised one hand in a relaxed gesture. "They tried to break into an apartment," he said simply. "Things got a little complicated." The officers quickly moved forward, securing the hunters and collecting their weapons. One of them checked the disabled armor systems and shook his head in surprise. "These are professional bounty hunters," the officer muttered. "How did you stop all 3? Daniel gave a small shrug. "Maintenance work teaches you a few tricks." The officer studied Daniel for a moment, clearly realizing there was more to the story, but he did not push the question. Instead, he nodded respectfully and ordered his team to take the hunters away for questioning. Within minutes, the corridor was quiet again. The flashing emergency lights shut down, and the station returned to its normal dim nighttime glow. Workers in nearby apartments slowly opened their doors to see what had happened, whispering to each other as they noticed the scene. News traveled quickly on a colony station. By the next morning, and most residents in that section of Orion Station had already heard the story. A group of bounty hunters had come looking for an alien child during the night, and a single human neighbor had stopped them. Daniel Carter did not try to make the story bigger than it was. After security finished asking their questions, he simply returned to his apartment. Lily was still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that anything unusual had happened in the hallway outside. The next day, Mira knocked on Daniel's door again, but this time her knock was not frightened. When Daniel opened the door, the little alien girl stood there holding her toy creature proudly. "Mommy says the door works perfectly now," she said with a bright smile. Daniel chuckled softly and crouched down to her height. "That's good," he said. "Oh, doors should keep bad people out." Mira nodded seriously as if this was very important knowledge. Alara soon joined her daughter in the hallway. Her posture was calmer now, and the fear that had filled her eyes the night before had begun to fade. She looked at Daniel with quiet respect. "You protected us when you did not have to," she said sincerely. "My people will remember that." Daniel shook his head gently. "You're my neighbors," he replied. "That's reason enough." Over the following weeks, the story continued to spread across Orion Station. Workers repeated it in cafeterias and cargo bays. Traders mentioned it while unloading ships. Even station security officers spoke about the strange human engineer who had defeated 3 hunters using nothing more than maintenance tools and calm thinking. But for Mira, the story was much simpler than that. Whenever she passed Daniel in the corridor, she smiled and waved happily. To her, he was not just a neighbor anymore. He was the human who fixed broken things. He fixed doors. He fixed toys. And on one frightening night on Orion Station, he fixed a problem that had been chasing her family across the stars. In a galaxy filled with powerful empires, dangerous hunters, and endless conflict, many aliens had once believed humans were unpredictable and distant. But sometimes the truth about humanity appeared in small moments instead of grand battles. Sometimes it appeared in a quiet hallway on a colony station. Sometimes it appeared in the actions of a single person who simply refused to let a frightened child face danger alone. And slowly, across Orion Station, the people began to say the same thing whenever Daniel Carter's name was mentioned. If you lived near a human, you might be safer than you realized.